guys, it's Fina and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in September. So September was a much better reading month for me than August was. I read about the same amount of books, but overall I just read more books that I enjoyed, and I just had a way better time reading than I did in August. August was a very slumpy month for me, but this September I managed to break out of that slump, and I'm so glad that I did. I also found some new favorites, which is so exciting, and I can't wait to talk about them. So without further ado, let's get into the books. So the first book that I read in September was The Whispering Skull by Jonathan Stroud. So this is the second book in the Lockwood & Co. series, and honestly, I think that at this point, I can safely say this series is not for me. This book wasn't bad, but it just wasn't great, and since I only rated the first book 3 stars as well, I really don't think that I will be continuing on with this series. I really don't want to continue reading a series that is only going to be a 3-star series for me, because there are so many other books out there that I really don't need to spend my time reading books that I won't enjoy. So I do enjoy the atmosphere of these books. I really love the ghost aspect. That's the reason that I picked it up originally. But the characters are very, very archetypical and flat. I really don't like the humor that Jonathan Stroud uses in these books. And I know these are middle grade, and so you're going to get that kind of humor, but it still drives me crazy. And so I didn't like that aspect either. I also really didn't like some of the dialogue. I just feel like that it was very stiff and awkward at times, and also sometimes very jarringly uncharacteristic and inappropriate for the situation, and not in a humorous way at all. While I enjoy some middle grade, I feel like this is the kind of middle grade that I generally don't like. And so even though this is a very popular, hyped series, I really don't understand why it's popular, and I will likely not be continuing with this series. After not loving 2 books in a row, I don't think it's time to jump into reading a third that will probably be the exact same reading experience as the first 2. The next book that I read in September was Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the sequel to Skyward, and overall I did not enjoy this book as much as Skyward. I feel like the points that made me fall in love with Skyward were very much on the sidelines in this book. The plotline was extremely slow paced. There was stuff happening all the time, but I feel like it didn't engage me the same way that Skyward did. There was a lot of needless exposition, especially in the first half of the book. And in the middle, I just feel like was mostly exposition and world building, and well, that's not a bad thing, I guess. That's not what I wanted from this book, and so that was disappointing. I also feel like some of the world building could have just been, not talked about quite as much as it was. There was some world building that was repeated several times throughout the book that really didn't have much relevance to the main plot, and I don't know why Brandon Sanderson chose to include it that many times. And I do feel like the character development in this book was also not as good as it was in Skyward. There was a relationship developed that literally came out of nowhere. I don't know what happened there. A lot of the characters that I had grown to love from Skyward were barely in Starsight, which obviously disappointed me a lot. The end battle in Starsight was interesting, and I am interested to see where this series is going in the 3rd book, and I really hope that the 3rd book will change my mind and turn the series around and bring back what I loved about the 1st book. I am still hopeful because I trust Brandon Sanderson to write great stories, but because I didn't like the way that his other young adult series, the Reckoners series, ended, I'm also a little bit hesitant. I don't know how the next book will turn out. I just really hope that it'll be good and it will change my mind about the direction that the series is going in. The next book that I read in September was A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. Now, if you know me, you know that I love Brigid Kemmerer's books. I adore them. Her books are just so wonderful and engaging, and I just love them so much. And I really, really did love this book. I really love the way that Brigid Kemmerer writes romance. I just think that she does a great job at it. And this is coming from someone who normally does not like romance at all in books because it's usually just not done to my satisfaction. But Brigid Kemmerer always manages to write a very good romance, and I really liked that about this book. I liked the fairy tale retelling aspect. I really love fairy tale retellings. If fairy tale retelling is in the book description, I am like 90% more likely to check it out. I just really loved the character development in this book. I loved Harper. She was just so awesome. And I loved Ren. I thought that he was a great character. And Gray was awesome. And I just, Brigid Kemmerer has become one of my auto-buy authors. I will literally buy anything that she writes because I just think that she does such a fantastic job at storytelling and character development and writing in general, and I just love her books so, so much, and I will definitely be continuing this series. The next book that I read was a YA contemporary, and that is Saint Anything by Sarah Dessen. This book, okay. So I didn't hate this book by any means, but I also didn't love it. I'm kind of noticing a trend with some contemporary books that I'm reading where some of the characters have these very over-exaggerated character quirks that are just constantly pointed out in the narrative and are super, super annoying. So in Radio Silence, there was this character that literally hugged her car and was like talking to it like you talk to a baby. And it was supposed to be funny, but I was just very weirded out by that. And in Saint Anything, there was this character who has an obsession with buying French fries from different fast food places and combining her ketchup in just such a way, and it kept on getting pointed out in the narrative, and I hated it. I am fine with authors making their characters quirky, but don't constantly keep pointing out the quirkiness. It gets old after a while, and it gets super annoying, and I really didn't like that. I also just didn't really feel very attached to the story, and I just feel like some of the plot lines that should have maybe gotten a little bit more page time didn't. And so sometimes I just felt like the character development and the character arcs just weren't done as well as they could have been. So overall, I just feel very meh about this book. I don't know if I'll try another one of Sarah Dessen's books. I do know that she's a very popular YA contemporary author, but I don't know whether I want to read another one of her books. If you've read Sarah Dessen and are a fan, would you let me know in the comments what book I should try by her? Are there any Sarah Dessen books in particular that you think I should check out? I would love to hear your recommendations. The next book that I read in September was actually my favorite read of September and one of my favorite reads of the whole year, and that is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I have fallen in love with this story, and I love the author's writing, and I am 100% going to be reading more of Diana Wynne Jones's books. I just adored this book so much. It's just so fun and whimsical and heartwarming, and this is actually the book that broke me out of my reading slump, which I love it for that. This book is just everything that I love in a book and everything that I wanted this book to be and more. I'd heard so many good things about this book from my friends before I picked this up, and so I obviously had very high expectations and all of them were met and exceeded. I loved it so much, and I just want to recommend it to everyone because it's one of the most wonderful, heartwarming books that I have ever read, and I just can't recommend it enough. The next book that I read was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I read this on audiobook and it was narrated by Neil Gaiman, which I loved. I think that Neil Gaiman does such a fantastic job at narrating, and I think that his narration again played a large role in why I enjoyed this book so much. I did enjoy this book more than Coraline, which I read last month, but I don't feel like this book is very creepy either. So if you're looking for something incredibly creepy, you might want to look elsewhere, because I don't think that this book is necessarily scary. I would say it's more atmospheric, and again, the writing is the reason that I think this book is so good. The way that Neil Gaiman writes just really captures the tone and atmosphere of his story, and I think that that's the high point of his writing. And so if you're looking for really, really great writing, I would definitely check out this book, and definitely check it out on audiobook if you like listening to audiobooks, because I think that the audiobook is phenomenal. And I did really love a lot of the characters, especially Silas, because he was awesome. And overall, I just think that this book is a very fun, atmospheric middle grade. The next book that I read in September was my least favorite book of that month, and that is Saints and Misfits by S.K. Ali. I had DNF'd Love from A to Z in August, and I felt really bad about that. So I picked up Saints and Misfits to listen to during September because I really wanted to give the author's books another try. I have been trying to read more books about religious main characters, and so I was definitely interested in trying out one of S.K. Ali's books because her main characters are Muslim. And so because I DNF'd Love from A to Z, I wanted to give Saints and Misfits a try because it's the author's other book. But I really, really didn't end up liking it. I didn't hate the main character, but I didn't like her very much. The dialogue was also very clunky and stiff, very similar in fact to the dialogue in Love from A to Z, and that really lessened my enjoyment as well. This book also deals with some very heavy subject matter, and the way that it ended up getting resolved, it didn't sit right with me. I don't think that it was resolved very well. Like, I can't really pinpoint why exactly, but it didn't feel right to me. And I can't explain why. I honestly can't explain why, but it just didn't sit right, and I did not like that at all. And so I just ended up not really enjoying this book, and I'm very, very sad because I did really want to love this author's books, but I just didn't, and I'm sad about that, but what can you do? So the next book that I read was Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This is a novel told in verse, and so I can't really say too much about it because it's so short, so I can't really talk about it without giving spoilers. This was actually my first novel in verse that I've ever read, and I did really like it. I think that it's a very good book. I will just put out a warning though, this does deal with some very dark, heavy topics. Again, I can't really say too much without getting into spoilers, but I did like this book a lot, and I think that it's definitely worth checking out. The next book that I read was The Silence of Bones by June Her. So this is a 2020 new release. This is about a girl who lives in Korea in the 1880s, and she is an indentured servant to the police bureau, and this book basically follows a murder investigation of a young noblewoman. I really liked the emphasis in this book on family relationships. I liked that this book didn't have any romance in it. I feel like that's very refreshing for YA, and I feel like it really wouldn't have suited the book to have a romantic subplot, and I did really like that the author chose instead to focus on family relationships because I think that's a very important subject to focus on as well. I think that the mystery was well developed, and I didn't actually guess the culprit before the reveal, which was nice as well because, you know, it's always nice to be surprised sometimes. There were a few flaws with this book. Sometimes the scene would shift and I would be very disoriented as to what was happening and where the characters were. And the dialogue sometimes felt a little bit clunky and stiff. I don't know if this was the author's intention, but it did kind of lessen my enjoyment of the book overall. I do think that this book is a very solid debut, and I will definitely be checking out more of June Her's work in the future. The next book that I read in September was Sadie by Courtney Summers. I listened to this on audiobook and would highly recommend listening to it on audiobook if you are going to read this book because I think the audiobook was fantastic. This book is very gritty and deals with some very dark subject matter, so I would definitely check out the trigger warnings before reading this book because it did get very dark and was at times very difficult to read. I think that it was a very good book and very well written, and the character development, especially the character of Sadie, was very, very good. And I will definitely be checking out more books by Courtney Summers because I think that this book was very, very, very good. And if you think you can handle the subject matter of this book, I would highly recommend it. The next book that I read is one that I'm kind of disappointed about because I was anticipating it very much and it ended up not being as good as I wanted it to be, and that is When the Sky Fell on Splendor by Emily Henry. I love the cover for this book. I think it's beautiful. I think that the synopsis is very intriguing. And so I was very interested in picking this book up. I had seen on Goodreads that the reviews were very low. This has a 3.51 average rating on Goodreads. And so obviously it's not the most well-liked book, but I did want to give this book a fair shot because I did really love Magonia, and that has a rather low Goodreads average rating, but overall I just didn't end up loving this book very much. The first 70% was very interesting. I think that the setup for the book was extremely interesting, and I was very excited to see where it was going to go, but then it disappointed me. The last 30% was a mess. There was a plot twist near the end that really didn't work for me. I don't feel like it was given enough build-up, and I really didn't like it. The author could have gone in a different direction and I would have been happier with how it turned out. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it either, but overall I'm kind of disappointed because I did really, really want to love this book, and I was really hoping for a book that was similar to Stranger Things, but it really isn't, and it wasn't that great either. So yeah, obviously that was kind of a disappointment, and yeah, I'm sad that I didn't love it, but I do understand where all the negative reviews were coming from now though. I also read 3 Agatha Christie short stories in September, and those were Yellow Iris, The Shadow on the Glass, and The Tragedy of Marsden Manor by Agatha Christie. So all 3 of these stories I rated 3 stars, and honestly I feel like Agatha Christie's short stories are not as good as her novels. I think that they're interesting enough mysteries, but I don't feel like there was enough space in any of the stories to give them proper development. I overall enjoyed The Shadow on the Glass the most. I think that it was a very interesting mystery, and I thought that the way that it ended up getting solved was also interesting. The Tragedy of Marsden Manor was my second favorite. I do feel like there wasn't as good a setup for the mystery, and I don't feel like the suspects were given enough page time for me to really be able to figure out who did it. And Yellow Iris was my least favorite. I didn't really love it that much. I feel like the setup was okay, but then some of the explanations were just not exactly to my liking, and I overall just didn't like that mystery as much as the other 2. So those were all the books that I read in September. Have you read any of these books? And if so, what did you think of them? What was your favorite read of September? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of my content. I post videos every Monday and Friday. I will see you guys again very soon. Bye.